Okay, good morning, everybody, or good evening or afternoon, wherever you might be, somewhere in the world. I want to welcome you all to the Stimson Center, and I am so excited because we are launching our new report, Charting a Blue Future for the Cooperation Between West Africa and China on Sustainable Fisheries. And this will be available today online, so we really urge everyone to get a copy and dive into it. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sally Ozell. I'm the director of the Environmental Security Program here at the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. And we focus a lot on IUU fishing and sustainable fishing, as well as seafood traceability and transparency. And I'm just really pleased to have a very impressive group of panelists, both here in the room as well as online. In video, and you can all see them there, so thank you all for joining us. What I'm going to do today with this very impressive group is I'm going to set the stage, and then they're all going to speak to their expertise. Then we're going to open it up for audience questions, both here in the room as well as online, and then sort of close. And we have about 75 minutes for our event. So I hope all of you will take advantage, and really ask questions and delve into it. It's going to be an exciting day. Morning. So let me first introduce our panelists. Our first speaker is going to be Rashid Samila, who is a professor and research chair at the University of British Columbia. I think many of you probably already know Rashid. He's so well renowned. He is the 2023 recipient of the Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement. And basically, for those who don't know, that's the equivalent of like the Nobel Peace Prize in the environment. Excuse me. And he's going to really help us frame the economic and ecological issues in West Africa and the importance of managing the fish stocks regionally. Then we're going to hear from Alexa Cole, who's the director of the Office of International Affairs, Trade and Commerce at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, known as NOAA, in the Fisheries Service. And she will highlight their newly released 2023 report from NOAA to Congress, the U.S. Congress, on international fisheries. And also, I'm hoping, Alexa, you'll be able to discuss some of the ongoing efforts across the U.S. federal government to combat IUU fishing globally. And after Alexa, we'll hear from my friend Mustafa Mena, who is a journalist and the West African regional editor for China Dialogue. And China Dialogue is an independent news publication which really focuses on China and the environment. Mustafa was recently exiled to the United States because of his reporting on these issues in the Gambia. But he will provide us with his firsthand accounting of the consequences of IUU fishing and fish meal operations on the local West African communities. After that, we will hear from Dr. Nong Hong, who is the executive director and senior fellow at the Institute for China-American Studies, where she leads maritime affairs and blue carbon and climate change programs. And Nong has been a good friend to Stimson. And she's really going to highlight China's domestic and marine conservation efforts, such as marine spatial planning, marine protected areas, and really the feasibility of transferring the knowledge internationally. And last, we'll hear from our colleague Sam Gale, who is the CEO of China Dialogue Trust. And he will discuss the greening of China's overseas investments globally and in the Gulf of Guinea, as well as really talk about, again, that feasibility of what China will do next in the environmental world, particularly in West Africa. So the report we are publishing today, if you don't mind me setting the stage a bit, the report we are publishing today is an outcome of really 3 years of very intensive research. We conducted a lot of interviews with many experts in China, as well as across West Africa. And our report really focuses on the Gulf of Guinea. We have looked at 10 West African countries, going all the way from Mauritania down to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we just conducted a lot of research. And so there's heft to this report, and I think you'll find it very helpful. What we did is we conducted what's called a Track 2 dialogue series. And what that means is we brought together civil society from both China as well as West Africa. And that's so rare, to get people from both sides of the world, from very different backgrounds, to not only have the courage, but take the time and really want to engage with each other and come together to try to develop solutions to the very difficult IUU fish meal environmental problems facing West Africa. And what makes Track 2 so helpful and so meaningful, if done correctly, is you get really different opinions. I mean, both sides of the world have very differing experiences and issues, so we talked about where they differ and where they come together. And so the ultimate goal is to really develop solutions that will resonate with the governments. And by bringing these different perspectives, we have a better understanding. We're not just coming up with a Western perspective or an Eastern perspective. We're coming up with these two perspectives that then we got complete buy-in and agreement from. They developed, the recommendations. So many of you in this world may say, wow, these recommendations are not the most groundbreaking. But what is groundbreaking is the fact that we came to solutions collectively identified, developed, and designed together by these different Chinese and West African participants. So why do we choose West Africa and China? I mean, to give you a little context on that, the Gulf of Guinea is home to the world's most richest fishery. In 2019, the region's total reported catch was an estimated 5.6 million metric tons. That's a lot of fish. And these fishery resources really support the food, the economic, and the ecological security of millions of people living from Mauritania all the way down to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And artisanal fisheries alone in this area employ at least 1.7 million people in the industry. And yet the Gulf of Guinea's fisheries and their marine ecosystems, as we know, are threatened by unsustainable fishing, illegal fishing practices, and pollution. And it is estimated, now get this, that West Africa loses 9.4 billion each year, US dollars each year to IUU fishing. 9.4 billion. And IUU fishing in the Gulf of Guinea is perpetrated actually from a range of different actors. It's not just the distant water fleets that many may think. It can be just the artisanal fishers not reporting their catch, or the mid-sized trawlers going from one country to another without permission illegally. So, there's a lot going on in the illegal fishing area. But China does have the largest distant water fleet, as we know, and not only globally, but also operating in the Gulf of Guinea. They've been criticized both for unsustainable fishing practices, poor monitoring and control and surveillance of their own fleets, and it's really resulted in significant IUU fishing, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, over the past decade. And we've also seen a large increase of just buildup of Chinese infrastructure in the fisheries industry. Not just the vessels, but fishing bases and processing facilities and Chinese-owned fish meal operations. They're all visible, very visible investments of Chinese investment in the coastal region. And let me also add that, the PRC has a lot of laws and regulations, and I give them credit, a lot of credit for that, to govern their distant water fleet. But the implementation and the enforcement has been extremely lacking. They kind of have this out of sight, out of mind mentality, particularly in the Gulf of Guinea. But there are a lot of lessons that I think that we can take away from, that can be learned from China's domestic policies, either in their own fisheries management, efforts to reduce air and water pollution, to conserve their own marine environment through marine spatial planning. And so that is a lot of what we discussed during our workshop and during our Track 2 dialogues. And so out of that came our report with 15 recommendations, all developed through consensus. And the recommendations really followed 4 themes: openness in fisheries governance, coordinated regional action on fisheries management, science and technology transfer, and food security and blue foods. So again, I encourage you to read the report. We're going to have that discussion today. And for those of you online, let me just say, you can submit a question through the link in the chat. And for those of you here in person, feel free to just raise your hand. So let's begin with our amazing panelists, starting with Rashid. So Rashid, first of all, welcome. Nice to see you.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. Yeah.
So you've conducted a lot of research and worked throughout the Gulf of Guinea. I'm curious if you can describe from your perspective, what are some of the ecological issues facing the fish stocks in the region? What are some of the economic consequences to the fishing industry? And you may recall during our workshop and dialogue, the concept of managing as a region came up over and over again. Really, the multilateral approach was discussed. So can you explain perhaps why this was discussed and why it is important?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sally, and thanks for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to get the chance to share and learn from West African colleagues and all the people in West Africa trying to sustain the blue economy, the fish economy, and so on. Sally, you gave such a great overview with data to actually explain why we are doing here is very important. And one figure I will start with is the 5.5 million tons of fish that you mentioned just in the Gulf of Guinea. And that number, just to let you realize, the audience, is huge. If you convert that to the number of mature cows, that will be the equivalent of about 5.5 million mature cows. You know, if you assume 1 ton a mature cow is 1 ton in weight, and that is a lot of biomass. And so the consequences of this is that is food, and it's not only for the coastal countries in West Africa and around the world, it's also for the interior. If you are in Burkina Faso, you get some dry fish into your soup, you know, it means a lot. It is jobs and so on. So the work I have been doing over the years with my colleagues and friends, both in West Africa and around the world, is to do our best and contribute the science to ensure that these benefits can continue through time, you know, to infinity, if you like. And the prospects are there because fish is renewable. You have to manage it well. Now, down to your specific question, the Gulf of Guinea, if you take it, there are roughly about 16 West African countries that are fishing in there. And as you know, it's one system. It's one large marine ecosystem. And the fish move around. The fish don't care about our borders. So there is a lot of togetherness in the ecosystem. And for us to fish those resources sustainably, you have to work together because it's one common natural resource. If one country is fishing sustainably and one is not, the consequences is that we all lose what is so valuable. That is why collaborative management is important. And anytime I get to the region, I always say this. The way to sustain this is for these countries to work together, manage it, do the science together, understand the fishery in a comprehensive way. And when they work together, they can actually chip in and ensure that no illegal boats come into the ecosystem and fish illegally, steal the fish of the people. So that is why collaborative management is so important. And the countries of the Pacific Island states are known to have done this very well. The small countries band together, manage their fisheries together, and they're able to get more benefits for their people, right? And in West Africa, it's not like that. Gambia will go and negotiate with China or the EU separately. Senegal will do, and that doesn't take you far. So that is why the collaborative management was such a big topic at our workshop.
Thanks, Rashid. I mean, that's a great way of setting the stage. Do you have any sort of insights before we move on to Alexa of, what is stopping the regional integration and management, from your, I mean, you've been traveling up and down the coast, so you've heard a lot. Do you have any insights into what may be an impediment to that? Can you hear me? All right, well, let's move on to Alexa, and we'll come back to Rashid, and perhaps someone can reach out to Rashid and make sure we can hear him. I mean, he can hear us. So, Alexa, I have to say that,
Was your question? What's your question to me?
Right, it was, Rashid. I was just sort of asking as a quick follow-up if during your travels throughout the region, if you have any kind of inclination of what has been the impediment to moving together to work in a more multilateral fashion. Why aren't the governments taking this opportunity when, as you point out, the Pacific has shown that it's economically feasible and helpful?
Yeah, so there are obviously see themselves as sovereign. They want to manage their thing alone, but that doesn't work with nature. Nature, you have to work together. And I think one main reason, as I see it, is actually language. Language. You will see, and there again we come to that colonialism thing. Now we're all trying to forget and move on. If you have countries like I go to Senegal and they all want to talk to me and I cannot talk to them, right? Because they speak French and I speak English because of our colonial history, right? So I think that has been a big stumbling block, and we have to find a way to do it. Clearly, there are advantages in knowing more than a language, but how do we cut through this barrier and bring ourselves together? Maybe we should mandate all West Africans should, those who are not English speaking should learn French and vice versa, so that together we can really start to work together to make sure that our fish actually works for the people living in the region. More importantly, right? Because there's no point having fish and then it goes out and services other people. It should be mutual. But the people in the region should benefit from these resources the most.
Thank you. I mean, I think what I'm hearing is the fish know each other's language. Now we've got to get the humans to be able to communicate. Thanks, Rashid. Really good insights there. So let's turn to Alexa, who also does a lot of work internationally and globally in her role as the head of the international office at Fisheries. So Alexa, you have just come out with a new report, the 2023 report on international fisheries. Both the Gambia and China were identified in your report as nations that engaged in IUU fishing or had some IUU fishing issues. So can you sort of help us understand what that report is all about, what it means to be identified, and how does this report change behavior moving forward? And then afterwards, I also want to follow up similar to Rashid's about how communication internationally.
Thanks, Sally, and thanks for having me on the panel. I feel like I'm going to learn a lot more from the other experts on the panel than I have to share today, but happy to talk about our report to Congress. Every 2 years, we issue a report on improving international fisheries management. This year's report came out on August 31st, right under my deadline of getting it out before September. And we are tasked with issuing this report every 2 years, whereby we're asked to identify countries that have either engaged in IUU fishing, engaged in bycatch of protected living marine or not engaged, but have bycatch of protected living marine resources, or have directed shark catch on the high seas. And so each year, each time we issue the report, it comes out with some identifications. We also do certifications for identifications that were made 2 years earlier. So the report really initiates a 2-year consultation period. And so the goal of the report and the goal of an identification is really to begin a dialogue with the identified country or administration and start to talk to them about how they can address the activities for which they were identified. And sometimes it's pretty simple. It is a vessel or two that have engaged in IUU fishing, and there needs to be an investigation, action taken in response to the investigation as appropriate, and it can be quite simple. But sometimes it's more systemic problems that we've had countries that need to update laws or expand laws or have that are penalties for laws or longer statutes of implementation. So when you ask how it works slowly. But it is all about that kind of cooperation and collaboration. And we have seen through this process, this is, I can't remember which report, I think our 6th or 7th report, we've been doing it for about 13 years, I think. And we have seen some countries really move and really start to change their approach to international fisheries management and domestic fisheries management. So you're right, China was both negatively certified for some identifications that we made in 2021, and then we identified China again for some additional alleged violations, and this time the IUU fishing identification also include issues related to forced labor. And then we also identified the Gambia this time for some concerns about its activities in the ICAT area. And so what it really is about the dialogue. And I have to admit that some countries are better than others in terms of how they engage with us. Some countries are really excited, in fact, and willing to engage. And nobody's happy to be identified, let's be clear. But some of them are happier to work with us. And it is an opportunity for us to share lessons, because I think that just goes to the point that we heard. The ocean is big. Fish don't respect boundaries. There is no way that one country solves these problems alone. The only way this works is when we collaborate. And that's part of this. And so it is a little of a carrot and a stick process, this report. But in its best form, it's a collaboration between us and the identified countries to get them to a point where they are able to either have the capacity or have the political will, or both, to be able to address these issues on their own.
Well, that brings me to actually a couple questions that I'd like to follow up on. I mean, you know, we hear this often, that when we're going after IU fishing perpetrators, when we go after vessel or whatever, vessel or port or vessel or a company, it's like a balloon. You know, you address it here, and then it pops up over there when you squish a balloon, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so how does your report really, I mean, what comes out, first of all, 2 years is a long time. So what happens in that 2-year period? I mean, you talked about dialogue, but, you know, have you found that it's been a deterrent, I mean, in these countries that have been certified, or do you think more certifications will get you to a more deterrent activity?
Well, we start with the identification. I think that it can be a deterrent. I am not certain that this statute plays a large role in the deterrent factor. I think it is much more effective just as a collaborative tool, as how we cooperate together to improve their international fisheries management. As I say, some countries are more troubled than others by virtue of being identified. It is, I mean, the whole international regime is sort of a naming and shaming regime in a lot of ways. It isn't, you don't have the same tools that you have domestically. And so for some countries, being named brings more shame. Other countries are more immune to that shame. And so I think it has varying levels of success. But to your point of the balloon piece of it, I mean, that's right, but that's what argues for that kind of multilateral cooperation that you were just referencing, which means that they don't go from, well, I can't get into this port, so I'm going to go to that port, or I'm not. This country is asking me to do too much, so I'm going to fish in the other country. The more that we have all share these tools, the less ports there will be, if you'll use, allow the pun, for vessels that want to engage in illegal fishing.
That totally makes sense. And so let me just do one more follow-up, because you talked about some countries, name and shame, some countries more willing. I did note that China came out immediately with a press statement saying, they totally disagree and they, blah, blah, blah. But also, you say that some countries really want to work with you all and take this as an advantage. So the Maritime Safe Act created this working group on combating IUU fishing in the U.S. It's, I think, 20 agencies or something.
21.
21 agencies are part of it. And in that, there have been specific regions and countries listed in that report as priority areas. And I note that the Gulf of Guinea is one of those. And I think the Gambia is also one, I think. But maybe it's just regions. I think it's regions. What does that mean if you're a region?
So under the Maritime Safe Act, we do have this 21 federal agency, interagency working group on IUU fishing, which is a mouthful. And so, as we said, the world is big. And so we need to be able to try to marshal our resources in a coherent fashion. And so we did. We identified what we think are priority regions, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 regions. West Africa is a Tier 1 region. What that means is it's an area where there is a problem of IUU fishing and that it feels like there is a needed attention to help address the issues in that area. It's a hot spot, if you will. And then we also identified priority nations or administrations, and Senegal is one of them in the area. And what that means is we identified 5, and they are not the countries that we think are the worst offenders for IUU fishing. Those are countries where we feel like either IUU fishing is happening in their waters or by their vessels, and there is an openness and a willingness to help us address it. But they are in need of either capacity building or help with the political will. And so our goal for those priority countries or administrations is that, they're our first group that we work with, and that we hope they then sort of come to our side of the table and help us work with the next 5 countries and the next 5 countries. So that's really the goal, so that we can prioritize our work as we spread it across the world.
Great, thank you for that. That's a nice sort of trajectory there for those who want to help. Here's some help, and we'll work together with you. That's great. So, Mustafa, we've just talked about the Gambia. That's where you are from. You have been an amazing reporter over the years, really putting a spotlight on the environmental issues there as an investigative journalist. So I guess if you could just sort of help us all understand how has IUU fishing and fish meal factory operations impacted the local communities, not only in the Gambia but West Africa, but certainly in the Gambia where you were from. I mean, you showed us some of the factories and some of the communities when we visited there in April. I think everyone would benefit greatly from your experience.
All right. Sorry for that. Thank you so much, Sally. So Gambia, where I'm from, we have 3 fish meal factories. Even though IUU have been happening in the Gambia for quite a long time, with little willingness from the government, because IUU involve foreign trawlers. So I will start with fish meal. So fish meal, we have 3 fish meal factories in the Gambia, and we have 7 operating in Senegal, and Mauritania is about 40. But if you look at this Gambia, Senegal, and Mauritania, these are just like, they see us the same stock, that is Sardinella and Bonga, and we all say fish has no border. But for the Gambia, which depend mainly on tourism and agriculture, tourism is almost gone now, because when fish meal operates, it stinks. And Gambia, being a country that really rely on tourism, has a lot of youths who are engaging in tourism. Those that have juice bars and those that are engaging in hotel business. But recently, we have seen a high increase in migration, because those who are engaged in this business are leaving the business because they cannot compete or they cannot do a business where it is stinking. So, and the other part is overfishing. Fish meal in the Gambia, because there is no data, this is very clear. The Gambia has no data when it comes to the capacity of fish meals. So we estimated, because we did, as an investigative journalist, we did our fact find, and we realized that the fish meals in the Gambia, their capacity is about 500 tons of fish per day. So meaning we have 3. So meaning each day they process 1,500 tons of fish. This is a lot. If you look at a country that has 1.8 million, that solely depends on Sardinella and Bonga, because the country poverty rate is increasing every day. So as a journalist and living in a community that has a fish meal factory, it's like a first-hand experience for me. It's not only about reporting, but it's about living and experiencing it. And that's what really motivated me to go further to make sure the community and the country understand the danger. So for the Gambia, Gambia recently has a partnership with CSEPA to make sure they combat IUU. But interestingly, even the boats that were intercepted by IUU and fined by the government, there are few individuals within the government that usually go on the ground to negotiate. Because the Gambia government said if a boat that is caught for IUU can be fined up to $1 million, which is about 25,000 US dollars. But now we are seeing the boats that are caught on IUU are charged for $1,000 because they bargain the price. That shows lack of seriousness from the government. And that really creates a huge problem for the Gambia because right now there are a lot of fish scarcity in the country and the people who depend on fish are getting problems. Like I said, I'm from a place where they said we have the most intelligent people because I think we eat what we call omega. And omega is from Sardinella. But now we are moving into chickens, fruits and chickens that we don't even know where they're coming from. And this has a lot of implications, health implications, because our Sardinella have been taken away to feed the aquaculture. And in fact, that's why I keep saying the whole aquaculture seems to be a scam for me, because you cannot take a fish to feed another fish. And in fact, taking a fish from the local people that has no money to feed a country that has at least money. This is kind of like a scam. And the other point is the community have been already divided because of fish meal. Fish meal has financial implications, social implications, and even environmental implications. In the Gambia, since 2016, the fish meal have been discharging their wastewater into the ocean, and there's no treatment plan. The government said they have treatment plan, but I have seen treatment plan. Any treatment plan there must be a laboratory to test whether the water or the wastewater is fit enough to discharge in the ocean. And the government said they have a treatment plan, and there's no laboratory. So that shows that they just discharge all their wastewater, which recently caused a lot of seaweed bloom. I wrote a story about it, seaweed bloom, because of eutrophication. And when I approached the government, the director of Fisheries was saying, if you wrote my name on your story, I'm going to take a legal action against you. And we have seen in Gambia where a permanent secretary who says fish will never finish in the water. Imagine someone who worked in the fisheries sector for 30 years saying fish will never finish in the Gambian water. That is, he was trying to play with the minds of the local people because Gambia also has a high illiteracy rate. So whatever you say as an experienced person, they will listen to him than me. So he used that to play with the minds. And the other part is they say the smell of fish meal is the smell of money. Imagine people are having health implications. So in the Gambia, there's a lot of implications. And when it comes to socially, well, families are divided. Like for me, when I have a program at home, many community elders will not come to my program because they see me as anti-Chinese, anti-development, or pro-West. So that have caused a lot of problem back home. So like I said, we're talking about a lot of youths now taking this dangerous way to go to Europe. These are youths that never thought of using. I keep saying, like, leaving your country is always the last choice for every youth. It's difficult. It's sad and it's painful, especially getting far from your family. But they are doing that either for them is either economic or either safety. And the last point will be back to IUU. Gambia, unfortunately, have no protected zone compared to Senegal. But again, Gambia has a lot of laws and a lot of good regulation that should protect our marine species. But implementation becomes a problem. It's not about capacity. For example, you are allowing fish meal to come. The Gambia before, according to the minister, or former minister, who once told me, Mustafa, you are the main reason why I am now quitting all social media because you attack me directly and the people start to attack me. But that's the reality. Sometimes what I do personally is name and shame for them to feel like people are suffering. It's not about me, it's not about you, but it's about the future generation. Our ozone is bleeding seriously. So what happened now is we are seeing vessels, foreign trawlers mainly from China, that are doing IUU, one, fishing bycatch or fishing at their own zone. And this has caused a lot of problem because they always have confrontation with the local artisanal fishing vessels, which are now most of them live in business. We visited Sanyang, a community that used to have a lot of fish. And in fact, they dry fish for preservation because we don't have these big company to freeze the fish. So we dry it using salt. But all those places are now completely empty because they don't have enough fish to do. If you don't have enough fish to feed your population, how will you even have that fish to dry? And that have created a problem, so security issue in the Gambia, because when communities get so angry, they even have to attack the fish meal factory and burn it. And not only attacking to burn it, but they attack the police stations for burn it. And the last part will be, I have a personal, who used to advise us about law. He's a very good lawyer. Because I first went to exile in Cyprus, because I have been talking about human rights issue and the environment for quite a long time. It's like something that I grew up with. And the former government has to force me to exile in Cyprus. So after the change of government, 2016, I returned back to the Gambia in 2017 to continue what I've started. And I have a friend who is a lawyer then who used to work with us, advising us about legal issues, because I organized the protest with the community, and he joined us. But imagine, after that protest, the government have to hire him as a high court judge. So now he's not with us, he's with the government. And in fact, when the youths burned the factory, they took the youth, he was responsible for the court case. And this is someone who I personally write a lot of stories with. We do a lot of advocacy to make sure the fish meals end. It's not about we don't want investment, but it's about more of the implications, the health implications, the environment implications, because the fish that are dying, these are fish that can feed the local people. So that is the situation, the unfortunate situation that the Gambia have. But it's not only the Gambia, because I do some investigation also in Senegal. Senegal is more close to the Gambia, and as a regional editor for Channel Dialogue, Senegal, Gambia, and Mauritania are the countries that I'm supposed to do work with. But Mauritania is a country that is very difficult to get information from. It's difficult, but Gambia and Senegal are countries that I personally work with. But the whole, in a nutshell, these are countries that are not willing to support the cause, even though the community are now taking legal steps to sue the companies to court. But I've seen in the Gambia where a legal suit since 2016, there's a legal suit since 2016, 2017, still now there's no progress. If you go to Senegal, there is a legal suit, but still there is no progress because the government is not willing to make sure the companies comply with the law. And for the Gambia, the only justification that they keep giving is they don't want foreign investors to be scared to come to Gambia. That's the justification that they give. Because if you start prosecuting or start taking legal action against companies, it will scare the other companies. I keep saying it will scare the bad companies or the briefcase companies or the briefcase investors. But serious investors will like to be in a country where there is a law. Yeah, that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you. You've really painted the full picture, the air pollution, the water pollution, the economic issues, the loss of sustainable fisheries, just the effects on the communities. I will give some credit to the government because we did have a workshop in addition to the track 2, and so we had another workshop. And the government did show up. The Minister of Environment showed up, and also some of the senior people from the the Fisheries Agency showed up and were willing to talk and answer questions. So there seems to be some sort of a willingness, but when you talk about these issues and what we saw, as you mentioned, literally fish drying racks empty, women in the market telling us that, the price of fish has gotten so high for them, it's hard for them to get them to sell because they all go to the fish meal factories. I mean, do you think, moving forward, there could be an opportunity, for China? I mean, China has, to work together with the government and with the community after we've laid out our report with some of the recommendations of transferring knowledge and management ideas and working together. Do you think they'll be willing to come to the table at some point?
Yes, I think they will, because that report was actually people-centered. Because, like I said, we have the government, we have the activists, and the civil society usually should be the ones to push more, because sometimes the government will look at more of the political angle, how best they can to make sure they don't hurt each other. It's more like pushing for more interest. But before going to that, I would like to address more about the price issue. Fish prices have increased in the Gambia more than 20. Before the price of fish is $10, and now the price of fish goes to up to $30 to $40. That's a high gap that really makes a lot of people not to afford it. But the report really will help the Gambia government a lot to collaborate. But I think Gambia cannot do it alone. Gambia is about 1.5, and our coastline is about 80 kilometers. That's absolutely nothing compared to Senegal. So, and Gambia and Senegal are one because most of the fishermen are from Senegal that are fishing in the Gambia, because fishing in the Gambia and Senegal is associated to a tribe. So it's like identity. So my tribe cannot do fishing, or we don't do fishing, but there are tribes that are usually engaging in fishing, and most of them are even losing their identity because they are leaving the business. So, but if Gambia can collaborate with Senegal and Mauritania, obviously they can, because Gambia alone, 1.5 million, we cannot negotiate fisheries issue with China. But if we move a regional issue, which the report emphasize more, we'll definitely make it. I am really sure if we collaborate as a region, there's going to be there's going to be hope.
Well, great. So, so we've heard consistently this regional effort, both from all our previous speakers and with Gambia listed, as well as, a priority region of the Gulf of Guinea. Maybe we're going to start to get some of that moving. Okay, so let's turn to Nong, because Nong, has been working with China environmental issues for many, many years. And so Nong, in our report, we highlight, as you've heard, some of China's domestic ocean policy efforts and successes. And they've been focused on your expertise areas, like area-based management and conservation, marine protected areas, marine spatial planning. And so we have talked a lot in our report about knowledge transfer and training as an opportunity for China to come into the region and do more of that, more of showing its successful conservation and management efforts and really transferring that. So from your perspective, I really have two questions. The first is, are there lessons that you think that have been learned from China's domestic experiences to balance conservation and sustainable use that can be transferred to West Africa and other places overseas? And if China gets more and more engaged in this kind of effort, from your perspective, has there been criticism of China's collaboration with West Africa, or would there be on ocean-related issues?
Well, thank you, Shelley, and for inviting me and join this panel. And then congratulations for the launch of this report. And I am the person who never been traveling to West Africa. I'm not really involved in IUU fishing, but I'd like to talk about, as suggested by Sally, first of all, China, the ocean strategy, ocean development is very important for China, given its very long coastline, and has done a lot in terms of domestic legislation, as Sally pointed out in the very earlier, in terms of environment protection and search and rescue, and then also marine protected areas. And the two examples that Sally mentioned, one is the marine protected area. China has done a lot in many of its coastal provinces, and also another example is marine spatial planning, which offers several valuable experience or lessons, not only for the region, but I think we also learn China at the stage of developing its blue economy strategy, and it also learn from other countries. Let me highlight a few approaches that China has been taking very seriously into consideration and also implementation in terms of marine protected areas and marine spatial planning. The first one has been taken integrated approach, which means that we're including important involving different sectors and various government agencies and scientists and also local community in the decision making. And the other approach is the science-based decision making, which means that China actually relies on scientific research and data to inform. On the one hand, we want to make sure it's a conservation. On the other hand, it's a rational, sustainable use of these resources. So this underscores the significance of its investment in marine research and monitoring to understand the ecosystem. And the third approach or benchmark is ecosystem-based management. As Professor earlier mentioned, this large West African a broad ecological context. I think when China developed its ecosystem-based management, it also look into other areas of the region to learn from each other. And another approach is zoning and spatial planning. I think China's marine spatial planning involves dividing different maritime areas in different zones for different uses. And the lesson is that spatial planning can help minimize the conflict of interest for different uses. On the one hand, conservation, on the other hand, rational and sustainable use. And then the other very good example one I emphasize, although I'm not involved in talking to community engagement, but I do have experience attending workshop that bring people from the fishing community and also, for instance, mangrove or blue carbon community. Yeah, I think China's been done a lot of efforts to engaging the local community and it's developed marine protected areas management and sustainable uses. So, and empower the local communities and recognize their traditional knowledge involving in the decision making. And certainly, I think there's other different approach where we can read from its regulation, including, for instance, enforcement and compliance, which means has invested in monitoring or surveillance and enforce capacity to combat illegal activities. Transparency and accountability, it's also important, but it's a long process to reach the standard of transparency and accountability. And it also involved in many international cooperations. And long-term commitment is certainly a very important benchmark to make sure that the maritime protected areas and spatial planning is well achieved. So in the context of West Africa, I think my understanding of every country have a very strong desire for development in its blue economy. However, given that due to the limited infrastructure and also lack of self-sustained capability, so external cooperation is urgently needed. So my understanding is that traditional maritime cooperation partner with West Africa is United States, Japan, and European Union, and China is catching up. And there is a mismatch between the needs and aspiration of African countries to access external fundings and technology transfer, as Sally mentioned. So I read some document and also read some analytical written by West African scholars who were working in this field. There is some concerns about, for instance, U.S., Japan, European Union. They are dominating the high end of the global ocean value chain, while every African country occupies the lower end. So then there is a significant disparity between the two sides in terms of industry focus. So for China's role, China is actually standing in the middle in terms of global value chain, and also on the overall scale, technology and management. So I think Africa requires the spillover effect of funds, technology, and management experience from China, and China also needs to learn from the local community as well. And Sally mentioned, I'm not quite sure where I can raise very specific question as example of how China cooperate with West African countries on blue economy, but I happy to share like China's cooperation, for instance, with ASEAN country for blue economy development, with Indonesia, for example, with Malaysia in terms of the aqua disease control. There are a couple of other examples that I can happy to share when talking about China's experience in managing maritime protected areas and spatial zoning. And the second question is about criticisms, and I think Sally, you mentioned already in the beginning of your introduction. I think criticisms on China's involvement, sending its distant water fleet to fishing in West African waters. So try to make sure that it will apply with domestic law, but certainly there are a lot of concerns. For example, resource exploitation. Some people argue that China's fishing fleets might engage on sustainable fishing practices of the West African coast. And I think that's not only about the China, there's concern for all the foreign distant water vessel fleet. And this identification of fishing is affecting the livelihood of small scale fishing community, etc. And I also read this argument is also read through your report. And the other is certainly about environmental concerns. So it's not only about West Africa. I think it's a global issue in terms of marine pollution, plastic, bad pollution, etc. And certainly it's a universal concern when we're talking about China's investment in Africa and also in Latin America. It's about the debt concerns. I'm sure that you hear from our previous colleagues. And then I think there's one thing I also like to emphasize, and I understand there was competing interests because the concern about China's growing influence in the West Africa, including in the marine sector, they may lead to, for instance, like competition with other countries, like traditional maritime cooperation partner like United States and Japan and the European Union. There's a conflicting interest as well. I think, yeah, Sally, I want to share with you.
Thank you for that, Nong Hong, thank you for that perspective. I mean, I think it's so important because it really lays out what is possible, what is feasible. I do recall back when I was at the State Department, we did a lot of dialogue with the Chinese government about how we could work together on marine spatial planning and technology transfer and science and whatnot. And I really do hope that this could be an opportunity where China would work more closely with West African countries. And, China tends to work on a more bilateral perspective, but my hope is that they would take, because the ecosystem is not a bilateral ecosystem, it's a multilateral ecosystem in government terms, that they would take these lessons and really work regionally. I have to admit, when we did our workshop, we did invite, Mustafa and his colleagues spent weeks trying to invite the Chinese fish meal companies to our meeting. They did not respond. Similarly, the embassy. But I'm really hoping that what you have said, what we've unlocked here, will really help move that needle forward so that we can get more of that kind of collaboration. Let me now turn to our colleague Sam from China Dialogue, who is an expert in China environmental policy and issues around the globe, and as well as West Africa. So, Sam, we've heard a lot about, building off of what Nan was just talking about, how China has improved its domestic fisheries and management, marine spatial planning, and laws at home. So I'm really curious, do you think this can be replicated and utilized, their expertise? Can they bring it? Are they willing to bring it and take those same laws and regulations and implement them globally? That's question number one. And then the other is, do you see opportunities for China to green its marine investments and transfer these best rules, regulations, practices to the Gulf of Guinea?
Thanks very much, Sally. It's a real pleasure to be here and to speak with everyone today and to reconnect with colleagues, including Mustafa. It's great to see everyone. Just really briefly to say, if participants after this launch event go to ChinaDialogueOcean.net, you can read our front page article today is by Mustafa, and it speaks specifically to this report and the ways that his particular sort of approach and experience of witnessing, initially, starting with the witnessing of dumping of unwanted sardinella in a foreign-owned fish meal plant by his home village, has sort of led to this much bigger set of intersecting questions and attempt to find some way for constructive dialogue, some solutions and way forward on the basis of this reporting. And yeah, it's been great to work with everyone on this project. To start with your questions around essentially how does China attempt to green its overseas investments? There's a lot to say, but I suppose I'll keep it to a few brief thoughts. One is to say that China, of course, mainly talks about its overseas investments through the auspices of what's known as the Belt and Road Initiative, of which 19 West African states have signed up. And through that framework, Chinese banks and companies have provided really significant investments and loans in various sectors, from extractives and typical high carbon types of infrastructure projects to low carbon infrastructure and more sort of transitions technologies that we need for the sort of carbon constrained world of the future, and fisheries and blue economy. So it's a real range. And if you look at countries like Ghana, for example, you'll see at the same time agreements to finance the Bui Dam in Ghana, which was finished in 2013, was rejected for financing by the World Bank and EU over concerns about its environmental impacts, but received financing from China. On the other hand, large investments in renewables across the continent, such as the large solar plant you see more in East Africa, financed often by Chinese banks with Chinese technology, full sort of turnkey packages, and in many cases also investment in ports, fisheries, and related sort of blue economy. In the Gulf of Guinea, you see the PRC making investments in Ghanaian ports, in Sierra Leone as well, in an industrial fishing harbour, and also investment in fishing bases. So, a wide range of sort of different industrial and strategic sort of support being provided that's necessary and very sort of key for a lot of development projects that are moving ahead in West Africa. And at the same time, of course, under the auspices of the Belt and Road Initiative, there is a lot of talk increasingly, and some of it is talk, but there may be interesting frameworks and sort of more actionable items that can be implemented around what's called greening the BRI. So, China increasingly talks, particularly since 2020 and 2021, about its efforts to move not only towards peak carbon dioxide emissions before 2030, to achieve carbon neutrality before 2060 in its borders, but also its desire to support the growth of renewable energy overseas and jointly sort of blue economy, sustainable blue economy, and similar sorts of efforts. And I do think there's an enormous opportunity for that. But at this point, it's one that's not well explored. Most of the Chinese investments overseas are, for example, these one-stop shops for the Chinese fishing industry with, Chinese-owned ports, processing facilities, fishing and support vessels developed under the BRI. The issue to explore, and I hope that the recommendations in our report start to sort of point to where this might be possible, is that there are, of course, ways to learn from that experience of greening in the PRC, and to think about how you can sort of build on those experiences and capabilities to redirect investment towards more sustainable policies and practices and industries. That could include things like ecotourism, rather under discussed but incredibly important in countries like the Gambia, that have a really critical tourism industry that has actually been very directly sort of damaged by developments like the fish meal factories, but also more sustainable blue economy industries that support economic growth, that support improved livelihoods, while also preserving the health of the ocean ecosystem. So that could be things like fish processing, it could be marine transportation, it could be renewable energy and ports. There are various ways in which a more sustainable blue economy can contribute to carbon sequestration, can be part of coastal protection, and can be far more sustainable. And even for the development of aquaculture in China, there exist really important alternatives to feeding wild-caught fisheries to fish as fish meal. There are really interesting, promising alternatives around, from feeding fish byproducts to fish for aquaculture, to processed animal proteins, to plant-based feeds, to insect proteins, to single-cell proteins, to algae. It's a complex and emerging kind of area, and there are various trade-offs associated with some of the different technological options. But clearly, this is somewhere that you could redirect investment away from some of the existing highly unsustainable routes that are currently well financed towards win-win options that are both sustainable areas for the growth of greener aquafeeds, and also could support local development alternatives. So I'll leave it there with those thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for sort of wrapping with that, broader perspective of what's going on in the greening of the BRA and other investments, and really then taking it kind of home. We did, as you just said, we did hear a lot of conversation about blue foods and innovative technologies from our Chinese colleagues during our discussions. So I really do think that is a future. And, I appreciated Nong Hong's sort of perspective about, there are laws, governance is slow, sort of the transparency and sort of openness, there are laws on that, and it's slowly moving in. But I think we really do need to do more of a transfer of some of those more quickly to places where Chinese private sector or state are working. So this is kind of wraps up some of my questions. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to both the audience and folks online. We've got some questions teed up online. Katie's coming over with a microphone. Is there anyone, before I go online, in the room who wants to ask a question to any of our very impressive panelists? And thank you again. No? Okay, well then I'm going to go right online. So we have a question from Nigeria. And the question is it's sort of about, I think, trust and partnership. Why should West Africa enter into partnerships with China on the blue economy to protect marine life? And what are the benefits of this kind of partnership? What are the shortfalls? And, China tends to look at international laws. And so how do we get them to be more engaged on these multilateral goals, as well as working specifically with the countries in the region? So I think, Rashid, because you are from Nigeria, I'm going to start with you to see if you might have some thoughts on that question to your colleagues and friends at home.
Yeah, this is a great question, actually, right? Because the thing is, if West Africa, Nigeria, and the other 15 countries have the capacity to actually sustainably fish the stocks and process it at home and support jobs and food and livelihoods, then the question is a good one. Why, So that is, I like the question. It makes you think. Now, having said that, in general, the world trades with each other, and provided it is of mutual benefit, I think this is crucial. If China is coming to work with West Africa mutually and in a respectable and beneficial way, then why not? You see that? So there is that. And fundamentally, another thing that should be very important in this relationship is the sustainability of the resource, right? It has to be said that. And I think the UN Law of the Sea actually talks about this. It is reasonable for any country to allow others to fish within their laws, in their waters, if they don't have the capacity or if the ecology allows it. So, and from all the data I've seen, actually there is overfishing in West African waters already. So then the question is, what are the consequences of Chinese or other foreign fishes coming into the system that might just squeeze out local fishes? So I like the question. It's very important, thought-provoking. We need to really check it out and see whether it is actually beneficial to West Africa for this relationship to happen.
And let me sort of follow that up with another question we've received for you, Mustafa, which is, are there existing sub-regional bodies that could take this on? Or, I think one of our recommendations is a gap analysis of what bodies could take this on in our report. But what are your thoughts on that in the region?
Okay, so in the region, I have not seen anybody that should take this. Maybe, Rashid, if you know any, let me know. But the fact is there is mistrust between these communities. I remember for the Gambia, they keep saying if Gambia is doing sustainable fishing and Senegal is not doing, that it means that Senegal is winning and Gambia is losing. And that is the mentality of the officials. So that says a lot. So right now, I have not seen or had any body that is responsible, even though FITI are doing a lot, which is an international body, but they have a West African branch, and they are doing a lot to make sure there is a transparency. But yet still, they have even facing a problem, but because not all countries are in, Gambia is not part of them. So meaning Gambia cannot collaborate with other countries to make sure this sustainable fishing that we are all talking about is of a reality.
Great, thank you. FITI has really started to make a difference around the world, both East Africa and West Africa. We've seen a lot of good examples. Again, anyone in the room before I go back to my, yes?
Okay, great. How big a role does fish oil play in this? I just saw a reference to it in your report, but curious, I mean, kind of curious, like generally, whether you see these fish meal processing plants as really serving important demand, or if some of it is more discretionary, and also, are there any, sorry, I'm lumping questions together, but as a second question, if there's time, are there any differences between what you've noticed around the fish meal plants in Mauritania and Senegal versus the Gambia? Are they all Chinese owned and all largely serving Chinese-based aquaculture? Just wondering if there's also European players or Western governments involved as well.
And obviously that will go to my colleague Mustafa, who is an expert on both of those issues.
This is a very important question. So one, I will first answer, the Gambia has 3 fish meal factories, and they are all Chinese, even though 2 of them are partnered with Mauritania, because remember, Mauritania has a huge capacity when it comes to fish meal, so they have experts. So most of the time, the laborers are the only locals, but when it comes to technical operations, are all Chinese. So if you go to Senegal, Senegal have Chinese, and they also have a Spanish company in Senegal, because the one in a committee called Kayar, if you check China Dialogue website, you'll be able to see the story that I wrote. The committee took a Spanish company to court because they are really destroying not only the environment, but they are also contaminating the water that the local people are eating. So they are drinking, so they cannot drink the water anymore, so they have to go and buy it, which is expensive for them. So for Mauritania, they have Spanish, they have Turkish, and they have the Chinese and the Mauritanians. So if you look at the fish meal in West Africa, it's mainly the Chinese, the Turkish, and the Spanish. These are the people that are mainly involved. So if you talk about the differences, the Gambia has no regulation when it comes to fish meal right now, because fish meal is something that is new to the Gambia. Fish meal started in 2015. Senegal are trying a bit to make sure they have regulations that are going to govern the fish meal operation, and they also have experts compared to Gambia. Mauritania, because Mauritania has a lot, and this is a country that also depends a lot on meat instead of fish. So they also have experts that are looking into this issue. So when it comes to the whole, this is the difference. Senegal, Mauritania are top when it comes to capacity and when it comes to expertise, and followed by Senegal, and the Gambia is behind. But when it comes to openness, Senegal is higher than the Gambia and Mauritania. Yeah. And the last one will be on the fish oil. The fish oil, the Gambia, for example, the Gambians don't know the use of whether the fish meal or the fish oil. The committee that I'm talking about, the committee that are having fish meal, if you ask them what's the use of this fish meal and fish oil, they say we don't know, because they don't even know, because it doesn't benefit them. But there was a report done by Changing Market, which I was part of. They realized that most of the stuff that are coming from the Gambia, especially the fish oil, go through Vietnam. There's a black market in Vietnam, and where they will be relabeled, because Gambia don't have the capacity. They cannot send the fish oil from Gambia directly to the European market. So they have to relabel, meaning they have to even change the origin of the oil in order for it to fit the European market.
Wow. Well, that certainly says a lot about the whole supply chain and what, the openness there. Rashid, were you trying to jump in for a minute?
Take me back to where we started. I mean, it really shows that we need collaboration. The difference is highlighted by Mustafa, right? Senegal is a small country. When we were there, one of the things, as I were doing the workshop and hearing from the different groups, the NGO groups, I was just wondering how can Gambia, 1.5 million people, ever get a deal that is fair from China. Just the size and the magnitude. And I remember one of the our Chinese counterparts said, you know, these things we are talking, it doesn't even appear in the horizon of the Chinese government. This is so small, they don't even see it. Meanwhile, it's such a pain on the Gambians. To me, this goes back to the collaboration, to West African countries working together, band together, so that at least you can increase what economists will say your bargaining power, so that when you go into these relationships, they're a bit fairer than what it is now, because it's really not. It's just terrible to see the differences in power and weight and how that can be detrimental to a country like Gambia. So please work together. That will at least increase your possibilities.
Thank you, Rashid. Okay, Philip, we're gonna have one more question. I know we have 2 minutes, so if you can make it quick, and hopefully the response can be quick, so I can just do a quick wrap.
Philip Cho, Oceana. The question is about these dialogues and getting greater engagement from PRC industry or government. Why do we think they wouldn't respond? And then if we know that, what might be some points of leverage or ways of incentive to help get them to the table?
Okay, so that's a great question. Again, you know, we had track 2, which doesn't include the government, but we did have workshops, which we did invite the embassy as well as the local industry. And I mean, I think they did not respond. Again, it's a very slow process, as Nong Hong's just said, about trying to get decisions to be made and whatnot. So I think maybe there's part of that, just a slow process leading up to the workshop. I suspect they didn't know who we were. I mean, not us, but all of the people coming, and they like more certainty when they're going to come to a meeting. And I don't know, Mustafa, if you quickly want to add anything that you think might have been going on.
Yeah, the one that I will add is that for me, I think they don't come for several reasons, because fish meal have been a hot topic in the Gambia already, and it has been a hot topic in the region. And secondly, immediately after our workshop, I have seen the Minister of Fisheries with the Chinese counterpart, and there was a publicity on their website. That again triggers something in my mind that they don't want to come to attend because they feel like it's going to be a forum where they can be asked a difficult question. So it's more of like there is uncertainty and a lack of trust between those who organize this and the whole Chinese counterpart.
Thank you. So I wish we had another hour and a half to continue this conversation. We have a lot of questions teed up, but unfortunately, we do not have time. But, you know, there are some things that we really, I mean, Mustafa just mentioned trust. I mean, you know, bringing together Chinese and West African civil society groups together to develop policy solutions that promote sustainable fisheries management, the responsible blue economy, development, coordination, regional action. These are all the themes we've heard today, as well as we've heard while we were there. And I just really want to applaud not only our panelists, but I want to also applaud the participants of our conversations. You know, it takes a lot of courage. This was an interesting project over the years, and it took a lot of courage for people to be willing to come together and trust each other in our meetings, share their ideas, with the hope that these are feasible ideas, feasible solutions that West African governments and the Chinese government can work on together. I mean, you know, we know this is a global issue. These are global commons. They have to be managed as such. And, for countries that need science and technology transfer, that is so important. Knowledge transfer, capacity building, political will. Political will was a big issue that we heard a lot about. Openness and transparency, very important for the future of sustaining fishing and environmental practices. And so we hope that China and the African governments will really take a chance, will really be, move this forward. I mean, the global south is in a major transition period today. Will the resources be used sustainably, or will they be depleted and used up? And so I really hope that today's discussion and our report is going to lay out a good foundation with some common sense recommendations and approaches overall that regionally West African countries can work together with Chinese government to really move these common sense practices forward and really help and improve the economic, the food, and the environmental security of the Gulf of Guinea. So thank you so much to everyone for joining and for our panelists and for people online. Thank you.